This is not common in Germany. And as soon as you've done that, you stand out already automatically.
So, back again. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Muza.
Pleasure.
For this interview, we're going to talk about how to actually nail your job interview in Germany. And you're a career coach. So I know that you're coming from a position of expertise on this, and I'm sure you're going to give plenty of good advice. How do you think people should prepare for a job interview in Germany?
This is a good question. Usually when you apply for a position and somebody applies for a position, and this is my also personal experience. As I mentioned before, I applied like 370 positions in the hope of getting at least like a sum of, which was not really clever at that time. But the sheer amount of rejections pushed me to apply even more and more and more.
Of course.
But I know it now, this is not the best solution. You got to apply only to those positions which you're really passionate about and you're really interested about. And then specifically target those positions, like smart target. I've talked about it, how you can approach the hiring manager and speak about the position. This is already in a first step of an interview process, meaning as soon as you've got in touch with somebody and you've already entered into the conversation, this is already a part of the interview process. Before, like in 2010, let's say, with the recession period, people got invited into interview. You usually sat down with a cup of coffee and then you started talking about, and they have specific questions like, tell me about yourself and so on and so forth. So you got to prepare to this standard questions like, tell me about yourself. Personally, I do not like this question because it segregates like zero-sum interest on a candidate. But recruiters are also learning from that. They will ask you standard questions, not because they didn't read your CV, maybe. They just want to hear a sum up because they screen through so many people. And they've, let's say, out of 1,000 applicants, they have nailed it down to 20. From that 20, they will most probably invite them within 1 week period stretch of time to do the interviews. So if you have 20 people being interviewed at the same week, they would like to have at least for themselves a memorization. Okay. That's why I mentioned the one-liner. You need to have always a one-liner or at least two to tell them to sum up what you represent. So, for example, you could say, I'm a teacher, aspiring marketeer. I would like to shift from this place to another place.
Mm-hmm. So in the previous episode, you discussed having a one-liner in your cover letter and in your CV, reaching out directly to a hiring manager. You also mentioned that you applied to a lot of jobs when you first moved to Germany, but now with more experience, you realize that it's better to target specific jobs when you're actually applying. But when you're preparing for the interview, if you found the right job, the hiring manager's gotten back to you, you've lined up the interview, how do you prepare for that actual interview with the hiring manager?
First of all, research the company. I mean, you obviously did the research to find the perfect job position, right? It's not about only the job, it's about corporate culture, right? So you can line up specific targeted questions. It's not only, the interview is not only about the candidate being interviewed, it's also a candidate interviewing the potential employer, especially in current job market. So what you can do is, first of all, research the job position, research the salary requirements of the job position. What is the range? I mean, this is one of the questions which you will be asked. And this is one of the questions I see a lot of people having trouble replying to. So what you're going to do is research company first, see, okay, what kind of a reviews company has. Go on a Xing. In Germany, there is a Kununu. You can even use the Glassdoor, or even when you go to Google reviews, you will see lots of reviews about the company. So you kind of base your opinion already from previous experiences with the previous employers or current employers. Then you've already researched that. So you're preparing yourself to meet this company representatives, and you already have formed a specific leverage about the company. And then you can ask targeted questions about company culture. You could prepare yourself to ask, okay, it's not all about the benefits, but it's about, okay, do you have an option to speak directly to the hiring manager and the manager who's going to manage you directly on that particular project, if it's a project-based work, or in your department? And ask about managing styles. of this manager.
Okay.
You can even ask about meeting the teammates. This is not common in Germany. And as soon as you've done that, you stand out already automatically.
Okay. Interesting.
Because usually the German recruiting process goes like, you get invited, you are frontally explained how the company functions or what is the job about. And then they ask you a couple of questions. And that's basically it, because it's like a scarcity process from previous times. But if it's an international company, they adapt obviously the international standard.
Yeah, of course.
And if you ask these targeted questions, and top it up with the question, like, for example, how can I assist you right now with one specific problem in my current role, which I'm going to step in, hopefully.
Yeah.
You're
already
this gives us
identifying yourself like as a game player, as a team player.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really clever. And even just like having done the prior, a lot of people, because that's something I think I kind of naturally did coming into interviews. And I only realized later on it's not maybe a common thing to research. I think I probably do because I'm just nosy, but to research the company before you go in so that you actually have a base of knowledge that you can build upon when you go into the interview is really important. I think going in blindsided is it's kind of silly because
yeah,
you're not going to learn a whole lot. And well, you're going to learn loads, but you're not going to demonstrate yourself very well if you can't prove that, okay, I've researched the company. Here's how I think I can contribute. How do you think I can contribute too?
absolutely. Well, I mean, it's not, there is no harm if you go into the interview and then you are semi-prepared, right? What kind of message does it segregate to a potential employer? If you are not even able to do the research just before you will go to the interview, and then at least in your short-term memory, save those informations and then tell them, hey, I came prepared.
Yeah.
And if you're doing an administrative work in that, if you apply to an administrative work, right, in, let's say in HR, or let's say in as an assistant owner or whatever it is, right? This delivers the message that you're not able to perform your job in more or less organized manner. You don't need to know everything about the company. You can obviously ask during the interview process, hey, I've done the research about this, about that, but I didn't quite get the structure or approach. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? But in general, you should know if you apply to a drug company or to a truck company. So there's like a huge gap in between.
Yeah.
So you need to know if it's a medical field or if it's an IT field. And if they do IT, what do they do? Do they do a front end? Do they do back end? Do they do general IT and so on? So this is like a kind of a general knowledge you need to bring with. And recruiters will ask you, have you researched? So if they ask you this question, it doesn't mean that they want to trick you or ask you a tricky question. They want to know where they need to roll out the whole entire information from the way back.
Yeah. How much do they need to share with you? How much are you
Exactly.
And it also probably makes the interview process a bit more efficient when they don't have to teach you everything about the company because you already have a certain level of knowledge. And then what you're asking about is realistically probably more insider knowledge of the company that you experience while you're working there, while you're in that environment and culture.
Exactly. And it helps the recruiters also to focus on your qualifications. So do your research. This would be my definite info. Do your research about the salary. And then when the question comes about the salary, you will be able to either kick back the question backwards and then say, hey, what's your budget? Mm-hmm. Or you at least know the range. So you can answer in ranges, right? So this information about the salary is widely available at the moment over the whole entire web. I mean, you can find this information basically everywhere. And more companies are inclined to disclose this information as well, because in Austria, for example, this is even obligatory. Like they need to disclose the salary information depending on the position and what range it is, or starting from at least. And the Germans are adapting also to an international and trying to disclose the information. But this information is available on Kununu, on Xing, on LinkedIn. You can basically type in the position and then say, hey, salary, and then it pops up, or Indeed or other job applicant portals where you can actually get this information. It's quite easy to find.
I'm learning so much here because salary is always, I think it's because I'm Irish. Salary is always something I'm always a bit like, how do I ask about that? How do I discuss that with an employer? Because for some reason in my head, it's taboo. Again, I think that's just an Irish thing. But I've always kind of wondered how to approach that question, when to approach that question, and how to estimate what I should be looking for. I think especially when you're new to the job market, like I just graduated this year. So this is my first, I think, real full-time job, like career path job. And I had no idea what to expect salary-wise. So it's good to know that, like, because I didn't even really know there were resources to find that. I think, at least for the jobs I was looking at in the Netherlands, there was very little information available on what kind of salary you can expect within the job applications themselves. But you're saying there are resources out there, and obviously I'm actually going to get you to send me those links so then I can link you
Yeah,
in the
sure.
podcast description itself, because it's really good to be able to access that information. I do genuinely think it's one of the things a lot of people struggle with. It's definitely something that comes up a lot when you're looking for a job in any country. You're trying to figure out what to expect salary wise. And actually, in the next episode, we're going to talk a bit more about salary, what salary you need to have a good quality of life in Germany. But it is kind of good to get the salary question into the interview. And do you think, like, if it isn't brought in naturally by the hiring manager themselves, is there a particular point where you should bring it up?
Absolutely. You don't need to bring it up on a matter like, hey, what do you pay for that? You've already done the research, so you have a specific expectation of the salary. But then at the end of the interview, you can basically ask them, hey, is there something what you want to share about the position? Maybe a company-wide benefits or whatever it is. So the recruiting manager will automatically jump into to this question. And then obviously, if they have done their research and they would really want to have you, then they would demonstrate as a company, in ideal case, what kind of a benefits they offer, if it's a job, bike leasing or whatever options they have, like, like a fruit basket and so on and so forth, which became a meme actually at the wider range. But
We won't pay you, but we'll give you some fruit.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it is basically, as I mentioned before, an interview process is an interview process, not only one-sided. A candidate has, at the moment, in this job market, a higher possibility if you come prepared. The salary range, the company, the job description. You are able to demonstrate your skills and quality of your skills and bring it on the table. And then, obviously, if you ask me, you should ask, what do you pay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I make a joke about it sometimes. Like if you I make a meme about it with the companies. Like it's not really appropriate, but if you pay bananas, you don't expect the lions to show up. So you get you obviously need to ask them what they pay. I mean, if you're bringing 15 years of experience,
yeah, you're gonna expect.
You're gonna expect that you are going to pay it appropriately for that experience, for that knowledge which you're bringing with you.
You're not going bananas. You're expecting definitely more when you have that much experience, I think. But also when you have that much experience, you have that much salary knowledge too. I think for a lot of people like me who just started, it's kind of like, God, what do I look at? What do I expect? But it's really good to know that there are resources to actually like find out. And I think when you have a number in your head, it's easier to bring it up, because if you don't have a number, you're not going to bring it up, because then they'll be like, well, what do you want? And then there, if you don't know.
Exactly. But they will ask you, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
My suggestion as a career coach and as a hiring person who have also hired teams, and my personal suggestion would be always ask for the range, what their budget is. So tell them, you can always roll it back. Don't disclose your salary expectations right away. In some positions, when you know exactly this is your minimum and you're not going to back down from that minimum, just put a couple of thousand more on top of it, a couple of percentage points on top of it, and then say, okay, this is I'm expecting. Yeah. And then okay, you're going to get a little bit less than that or more than that. You're fine, because you've already set the minimum expectation for yourself. But this comes with the research, obviously, and with your own personal finances, which you should take care of. Yeah. But always roll back the question to the company and then say, hey, what do you think? What are you offering for that particular position? What is the range? What is the budget for this position? Yeah. So you can always ask them. And then when they say, okay, our budget is from 2, and if you've done your research and if it fits or doesn't fit, you can always then from there renegotiate, or at least tell your expectations where you're setting it.
Okay. Very good. Very good. I've been learning so much from these interviews. I swear to God. If I need to apply for a job again, I'm going to rock it. I just know it. Okay. So when you're actually attending in-person interviews, are there any documents that you should bring to the interview?
Usually when you've already submitted your documents, from the side of the recruiter, if they bring their documents with them, it shows a good preparation. As a candidate, I always get my CV, especially I take at least one copy of it, because not every recruiter is the same. Not every hiring manager is the same. Some might show up prepared. Some might show up unprepared because it's like a spontaneous. So I would suggest always to have one copy of your CV or your resume at hand. You don't need the cover letter because that obviously got you already into the interview, but the CV in order to keep track of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Even if the hiring manager or recruiter doesn't need it, put your CV in front of you. So you can visually memorize for yourself and say, okay, they're asking that specific role. What did I write? Because if you've tailored your CV to a specific job position, you might not remember everything what you wrote on your CV. So having your CV in front of you helps.
Definitely, yeah. Because I think especially when you tailor your CV, you need to be able to remember what you're tailoring it to and what you're customing it to. That's a really good point.
So having the CV is great. And then having a notepad with preset questions is great. It shows that you came prepared. Mm-hmm. And it kind of puts the recruiter also to the position that they need to sell themselves more. Mm. Oh, this person, I mean, for example, if you would show up with me and then have like at least 10 questions on your notepad, I would most probably concentrate to give you as much information as possible so that you can tick off those questions on your notepad so that we can focus only on the core concept of your job application, the position and the qualifications and maybe salary negotiations or benefits. And then it kind of intimidates the other person as well. I mean, it's like a kind of a helping yourself to score higher on the interviews. Okay. You don't need to show them that these are 10 questions, but when you put a notepad and there is kind of a specific infos, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that gives the impression to the recruiter, hey, this guy came or this girl came prepared. This person's candidate is like switched on, turned on. Yeah. And notepad also helps you to memorize what they've written, what they've said during the interview process. Because usually it stretches could go from 20 to 1.5 hours. Yeah. And those notes will help you ideally when you've applied to several places, you've done several interviews to narrow down which company you want to work for.
So you'd also advise bringing a notepad to the interview, not only to have questions to give them, but also to jot down some of their answers so that you can recall later on what you actually discussed. And if you are applying to multiple places, you can differentiate between which interviews you actually had.
Absolutely. It's like a kind of keeping a pro-con list, right? I mean, then obviously which company has the more benefits, which company has a good culture, which company has a specific set of skills which you can bring with and where you have easier onboarding, which gives you obviously like a small notes to keep you track of your thought process during the interview. And then when you summarize them after the interview, it will help you even more.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good idea. I never even thought about that before. But I think I've also had so many online interviews now. I always just have a little Google Doc beside me. Yeah. I guess the notepad is just a actual physical format of that. We're just in internet mode now. Yeah. So then one of the more kind of specific questions again to if you're attending an in-person interview, should you dress formally for an in-person interview in Germany or is it kind of business casual? What's the deal?
Depends.
Does it depend on the company?
It depends on the company. I would always suggest the dress for more. Mm-hmm. Like if the company has a formal attire of uniform, then dress business casual. If they have a business casual, dress business. If they have a business, then dress more than a business. I mean, you gotta be a little bit over prepared. But obviously, if you're applying for but I don't want to stereotype particular job positions, but if you're applying for a Deliveroo or for Lieferando, or let's say a position which is more of a seasonal job or to help you out as a student to earn extra money, then you don't want to show up in a attire with a tie and a suit, right?
It's very memorable, in fairness.
Definitely, yeah. It can also turn off the
It makes you
recruiter,
look
right?
unprofessional when you go that far the other direction.
Exactly. But it depends in which field you're going at. Like most of the IT companies are more relaxed. So you want to look inclusive into the environment, but not too inclusive that you like blend in too much.
Yeah.
It's still a professional environment. So dressing business casual is always good. But if you're going for a position of, let's say, a tax advisor or a lawyer, was an international approach, then obviously you're going to dress like those people who are in front of you. More formally.
So I guess it really does depend on the job and the company itself. The dress code, I'm sure, is something that you can figure out beforehand online by looking at Glassdoor and looking at reviews and even just looking at pictures of the company in action.
Instagram. The best place to look for is Instagram. TikTok, I wouldn't suggest. Instagram would be one of the best places actually to do your research about the company, and then look at the photos of the employees.
Very clever. Never would have thought of that.
So many companies offer standardized photos of employees. So look at that. And then if you see an employee dressed with a tie and a suit in a company which is like a fashion field, then you know, okay, this is like a classical fashion company. If you look, for example, companies which produces sports brands and they are still dressed officially, then it segregates also like a company culture. Okay, they talk within the company very formal, very official, very distant. If they are dressed with more of a sports stuff, that what they actually produce and promote, then it says, okay, they stand behind the company. Yeah. They have a brand identity within the company. So you can then choose your attire according to that.
No, that makes sense. I never even would have thought to check Instagram. That's so clever. And LinkedIn as well, because obviously a lot of people will have like business specifically from their company headshots in. So yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah. Going back again to in-person interviews, German people are very punctual. Everyone knows that. I'm the antithesis of punctual myself. So I know that if I was going to a German interview, I think I'd be hyper aware of showing up on time, or at least showing up early. How early, or do you think people should be there on the dot, or 10 or 15 minutes early? What would you advise?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. I mean, standardized 5 minutes. If you know that the company is huge and they might need a particular time period to walk down, because the recruiters nowadays, when they work in a high growth environments, like or the places where a lot of fees are present, they are not just recruiters, or their hiring managers are not just hiring managers, because they have also other tasks, responsibilities to attend to. So you usually get, I mean, if you're in a bigger company getting an interview in person, you would usually get invited to the office. You would need to report at the entrance, get a badge, like to go to the, so they would calculate you would need to calculate a specific amount of time, but usually 5 to 10 minutes, not half an hour, because if you show up half an hour earlier and then give a notice, you are kind of putting a pressure on the hiring or manager or recruiter to hurry up. But this person might be on a lunch break, couldn't grab a lunch, and discussing kind of interview questions or whatever kind of a thought process is. And they're maybe preparing for your interview in order to ask you specific qualified questions. So just give.
It comes back to like your first impression again. It's what we discussed in the last episode with having the profile picture on your CV or not. It's the first impression that you're creating when you arrive to that interview, and also what you're wearing. When you arrive to that interview, if you arrive half an hour early, you're probably going to disgruntle the hiring manager a little bit. They're not going to be too impressed. So you would advise 5 to 10 minutes early. It's a nice little grace period, and it'll give you some time to get into the building and get to the office as well.
Absolutely. But we're talking about 5 to 10 minutes at the building, at the reception, or directly at the waiting area. So if you have a specific arrival time, like, I don't know, half an hour time until you get to the office, because your navigation doesn't say, hey, you have also 10 minutes to get into the building. So you gotta prepare yourself.
Yeah, of course. So you would advise arriving to the office 10 minutes early and then give your time.
Exactly. Yeah, not at the parking place of the
10
office.
minutes. Get to the general area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Get to the office 5 to 10 minutes early, or whatever business you're applying for, and warn them, but don't annoy them before your interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got going into interviews was to ask questions. And we've already brought this up a few times. Are there any kind of specific questions you think should definitely be brought up in an interview to the hiring manager? So I would be asking the hiring manager.
Absolutely. And in my personal opinion, you should ask questions. If you don't ask questions, you're not standing out.
Yeah.
One of the crucial questions, and usually I ask this question myself as well, is asking a hiring manager or a recruiter, if the person is taking over the hiring process for the hiring manager, is to ask, if I get to start tomorrow,
Okay.
how would my onboarding process look like?
Okay.
And then the second question is, if you don't want to ask this question directly, is like, if I get to start tomorrow, what specific problem am I going to solve for you for the next 2 to 3 months?
So what the onboarding process looks like, you want to get an insight to that, and also what problem you're helping to solve from the off.
Absolutely. Because these are the in my opinion, two crucial areas, because you don't want to start in a company where you don't know what your specific task and what your specific job description is, because job descriptions are created around specific area without specific focus on the job. So you never know, usually when you show up, what kind of a job you're going to definitely perform. Some companies write it down, like, okay, in the week 1, you will get familiarized with the company and so on and so forth. But this is like an onboarding process. But when you are talking to a hiring manager, you're talking to a direct manager who's going to manage you on job, on the operational part of it. You can directly ask them, okay, what is the challenge you're facing at the moment, and how can I help you?
Okay.
So this will directly give a sense to the person that you want to be in that job. And obviously ask also, what's the PTO look like? I mean, how do you distribute that free time, or how do you approach them? It's not always clever to ask this question right away, but you can rephrase it like, okay, what kind of employee activities do you have here? How is the culture? How the employees work together? Do they do sport events or whatever it is? I mean, if you have hobbies, like, are there any golf playing people here?
It's kind of similar to asking about, like you said earlier, the company benefits. So it's in the same voice as, what are you offering people outside of salary expectations? What are you offering your employees? And then that often will relate back to PTO. In my own experience, if it's not relating back to PTO, it means the PTO is probably crap, and they're not going to brag about it in that case. But that's also quite telling for someone. Like, if you're applying for a job and they're not talking about it, it's a bit of a red flag.
Absolutely.
Probably want to avoid.
Absolutely. Well, you see, in Germany, the PTO is like regulated from the company, right?
30 days.
So you've got 20 days fixed PTO time by law, and many companies offer additional PTO time, like 5 to 10 days on top of it. So usually when you apply to a company, they don't even mention the amount of days, how much PTO you're going to get, which is all regulated. You get up to 30 days of sick leave paid by the insurance company, and you can take that. So you have up to 30 days of PTO, 20 days fixed, but the rest of it is like a voluntary PTOs, right? And then some companies offer benefits, like, for example, for annual pay, or for example, the Christmas bonuses and so on and so forth, right? I mean, this is like a monetary compensation. And then some companies even offer now, especially younger companies, they offer also unlimited PTO.
I have unlimited PTO. It's sweet.
Yeah. You see? So, but are you going to use that unlimited PTO? If you're going to give them an example, another company offered me unlimited PTO, that this is a red flag for the recruiter. If they don't mention any PTO, then this is a red flag for you. What you could ask instead is like, okay, is there any excluded period of time where your workload is so high that you specifically ask your employees not to take the PTO day?
Okay, that's actually a very good question to ask.
Because then you are kind of indirectly asking, where are the time periods where the workload is so high that I need to manage my personal
Yeah.
life in that period of time around my work?
Yeah. It's definitely something you need to know before you actually get into the job, because
Exactly.
like if you have kids or whatever, you need to know what you're going to be getting in for in terms of PTO,
Absolutely.
like have your time off when you can't. And
Yeah.
especially if, I think, particularly if it revolves around like religious holidays or celebrations. For me, it's Christmas. I have to be able to come home at Christmas. So if I can't have PTO or in Christmas, it is a little bit stressful. I used to work in hotels, and PTO at
Hmm.
Christmas was a disaster because a lot of hotels don't close around Christmas time, and you had to either work Christmas or New Year's. And it just, for me at least, it made me resent working with them because I knew that I always had to have one thing that I wasn't happy about. I could never have it all. Whereas
Mm.
now, thankfully, the companies I work in, we have unlimited PTO, but it's a lot more flexible. And I knew going into those, like, okay, am I going to have to be in a particular place at Christmas time? Can I go home? Can I be a bit more flexible about it? So it definitely is a really good question to bring up in the interview process.
Absolutely.
So one more question I have before we finish up is, what are some common mistakes that people make in an interview?
Go go too deep into detail. But bear in mind, you have a specific set of time, like approximately an hour time, usually, to get to know the company, to get to know the recruiters, and explain the achievements you're bringing onto the table.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go overly into detail, operational part of it, because this is not the job of the hiring manager or the recruiter to get to know during that period of time. I mean, drifting during the interview is really an issue, because they will direct you. Let's get back to this and let's get back to that, but they are too respectful of your personality in order
Okay.
not to direct you there. So focus on the qualities. Quantity of the information needs to be reduced just to the chase, that they understand that what you can bring, and then be mindful of the time of the recruiter. So this is one of the mistakes I see a lot. What you can also concentrate on is using the specific tone of language. I mean, we all human beings, be respectful in a sense. It's not, because I work with different personalities and so on and so forth. Being overly friendly or being too formal is an issue, because if you're too formal, you're not building a connection.
Mm-hmm.
If you're overly friendly, you're giving a sense of an unprofessional approach
Okay.
towards the job.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't care about the job, or I care too much about the job.
Yeah. Yeah. One extreme or the other.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
obviously you've seen this
This other
in
two.
interviews before.
Yeah, I have absolutely, because people show up there and they don't literally care about position. They've applied there just because they've applied there, and you want to avoid that. We've talked about it. Focus on the positions you would really want to get,
Yeah.
and then everything is going to be fine. But if you do that, don't be mindful of how you talk to the people, and ask specific questions which is related to that particular position. No gossip, no drifting to other directions.
The gossip comes later. The gossip comes when you start at the company.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you
Exactly.
get it all out in the open.
Absolutely. And which is also an alarm signal, right? And never talk, if I'm gonna use slang, never talk shit about your previous employer. Even
Oh
if they
yeah.
deserve it.
Yeah.
Never talk shit.
Not in an interview process.
No.
Definitely.
I've seen that a lot.
Oh really? Have you?
Yeah.
God.
Because people are hurt, right? I mean, especially
Yeah.
those people who get laid off. They are hurt, and they want, as soon as is possible, to get back on any position and get the job and so on and so forth, because they're too afraid to take time to work with their issues with their. And in this particular process, I understand that. I mean, they would like to release that emotion somewhere, and then when they go to a different company, they think, okay, they're going to have an understanding because they've heard about this company who laid it off. Like, let's say, Facebook employee, ex-Facebook employee, who got laid off in a recent news. It goes back to, let's say, to Google, and then talks shit about Facebook. I mean, it doesn't come really good across.
Of course not. No, that makes total sense. Okay, so just to sum up again, nailing your job interview in Germany, you advise that people, before even getting to the interview process, target specific jobs. Don't just apply willy-nilly to hundreds of jobs. Target jobs that you know you're going to be passionate about, that you know you can talk about and you know you can engage with. You really advise researching the company, getting to know about the company culture, getting to know about your job, and getting to know salary expectations. Do your research on salary expectations. You've provided some really good links that I personally am going to use. Kanunu, is that right?
Yeah.
Sing and LinkedIn.
Sing, LinkedIn, and Indeed, or any job portals where you Glassdoors as well.
Mm-hmm. And we will link these in the podcast description. So if anyone needs to find them, they can. Sorry, I'm skimming over my notes. Oh yeah. You also said the interview process is a two-sided conversation. It's not just the recruiter interviewing you. You are also chatting to the recruiter, and you should ask questions accordingly. Come prepared, especially if you're coming to an in-person interview. Write down some questions to actually bring to the interview. Also bring your CV to the interview. It shows that you're prepared, keeps you on track, and it also allows you to take notes as the interview process takes place. And when you bring questions, the recruiter has to sell themselves as well. So it really does make it a two-way thing. You advise overdressing slightly, just a little bit over the standard, but not too much. Don't come to a delivery person interview in a three-piece tux, because then it looks like you're really unprofessional. That's just messing with company. You advise arriving to the destination 5 to 10 minutes early. Do not arrive to the parking or the city or the general area 5 to 10 minutes early. Get to the building 10 minutes early, but don't come any earlier because you're putting pressure on the recruiter. Ask about the onboarding process. Ask about what problems you will be helping to solve as soon as you start. If you start tomorrow, how are you helping them solve a particular problem? Ask about paid time off and how that works, and if there are any particular periods where paid time off is not feasible, or if it's a seasonal kind of job when you can't take time off. And in terms of mistakes, don't have too, what do I have? I can't even read my own writing. Don't go into too much detail in your interview. That's alarming. Don't go into too much detail in your interview. Don't oversell, don't overtalk, try and keep on focus. And be careful with your language. Don't go too formal because it makes you look like you care too much about the job. Don't go too friendly because it makes you look like you don't really care about the job. Is that a good summary of what we just discussed?
It's a perfect summary. I could have not done it better.
Thank you so much.